We're going to go over meiosis. Well, I think from the quizzes, this is one of the things that people had the most mistakes on. So I'm going to take a bit of time to explain kind of the basic structures, terminology, and steps involved. I'm going to do this with a demonstration that covers all of sexual reproduction, all the major steps. So that includes like fertilization, that includes mitosis, which you need in order to grow from a fertilized egg to an adult, and also meiosis after that. So you kind of see how all the steps are linked together. Okay, so to keep things simple and easy to follow, I'm only going to focus on what's happening to the chromosomes. Okay, so I'm going to ignore that the nuclear membranes are disappearing and reforming. I'm going to ignore the fact that the chromosomes are kind of loose from chromatin and condensing and being loose again. Again, ignore the spindle fibers altogether. We're only going to focus on the chromosomes and what's happening to them. Also, to keep things simple, I'm not going to have 46 chromosomes in the human cell. I'm just going to have 4. Okay, so in this example, the diploid cell will have 4 chromosomes, okay, 2 homologous pairs, right? So as I go through it, what I want you guys to do is to think about this particular problem of the Helmsworth Brothers. So for those of you who don't know, I really like Avengers is a good movie. This guy was Thor in the movie. So these 3 are siblings. So I want you to think about why the 3 of them don't look the same. Okay, so during this demonstration, right, when you notice a certain stage that you think will introduce some variation among siblings, make a note of it. Okay, you want to try to find 3 different stages or 3 different steps or events in this demonstration that cause siblings to be different from each other, unless they're twins. Okay, so the idea is, if they have the same parents, and they're always mixing together half of their DNA, why don't they ever look the same? All right, so once we're done the demonstration, I'll give you a little bit of time to share your answers with your team, and then I'll get you to share with the whole class. Okay? Sound good? All right, so switching over to another quickie little demo. All right, so this demonstration is going to start in, so let's say we'll figure out how we made a Chris Helmsworth, or we'll just call him Chris from now on, or Thor, and how he will reproduce and his offspring will be different from each other. So our story starts in Chris's mother's fallopian tube. Okay, and this is an unfertilized egg. So Chris's mom made this egg through meiosis, so it is haploid. So notice it only has 2 chromosomes, right? It's got a short one and a long one. Let's call that number 1, number 2. All right, so it's a haploid cell with 2 chromosomes. And so let's say that Chris's parents do the nasty. Sorry, make love. And so Chris's dad's sperm comes along, and it brings in 2 more chromosomes, okay? So notice. Don't get me started. I'm very prone to the giggles. Okay. So Chris's dad. Sorry? Think about their grandparents. Yeah, that might help. Okay. So Chris's dad, the sperm cells are also haploid, so they also has 2 chromosomes. So in order to keep it clear kind of maternal and paternal chromosomes, I've made Chris's mom's chromosomes red and Chris's dad's blue. Okay, so we have 2 chromosomes from the mom, 2 chromosomes from the dad. So after fertilization, we now have a fertilized egg, which we call the zygote. Right? Now we have the diploid cell again. So this is the first diploid cell of Chris Helmsworth. Okay? So notice that we have 2 homologous pairs. Right? So these 2 chromosomes, the ones that are the same length, are homologous, not just because they're the same length, but because they actually code for the same genes. Okay? So we might have the gene for eye color here and eye color here. All right? It might have different, they might have different alleles. So this one might, the mom might have given him the eye-colored allele for brown eyes, dad maybe for blue eyes. Right? But they're the same genes. The eye color gene might have the gene for hair color here, gene for building big muscles here. Right? So they have the same genes on each chromosome. That's why these are 2 homologous pairs. There are 4 chromosomes in total. Okay, is that clear? Okay, so this is only 1 cell, right? So in order to grow up into adult, we're going to have mitosis. Okay, we're going to have to split this cell into 2 more cells, and 4 and 8 and so forth. in order to make more cells, but we have to keep the same DNA, we have to keep the same genome there. So Before we split the cell, though, we need to double the DNA, otherwise we're going to start losing DNA when we split. So during interphase before mitosis, this is not a part of mitosis, but during the interphase of the cell cycle, we need to double the DNA. So during the S phase, we do DNA replication. And what that does is every double strand of DNA will split apart, will make the missing strand, and we'll end up with two sister chromatids joined together. Okay, so now each chromosome is going to be made up of two strands of DNA double helix, like so. All right? So in this cell, how many chromosomes would you say there are here? 4. Thank you, Connor. Yes, exactly, 4. Right? So some people would say, oh, there's 8 strands of DNA, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? But each of these, as long as they're stuck together, even though there's 2 sister chromatids, as long as they're stuck together, this is still 1 chromosome. Okay, so we still have 1, 2, 3, 4 chromosomes, 2 of which are homologous pairs in this cell. Okay? So during mitosis, what happens is each chromosome is going to line up individually along the metaphase plate. Okay? And the spindle fibers are going to immediately separate each sister chromatid into opposite ends of the cell. Okay? So that's during metaphase, and then anaphase is when they split. In telophase, we wrap them back up into their separate nuclei, and then with cytokinesis, the 2 cells will split. So the way they split is they form a cleavage furrow, so you see that the cells kind of pinch in from the outside until they form 2 separate cells. Okay, so what I want you to notice is the result of mitosis is that we have 2 cells that are genetically exactly the same as what we started with the fertilized zygote. Okay, in that we have 4 chromosomes, 2 long ones, 2 short ones. We had 2 that came from Chris's dad, 2 that came from Chris's mom. Everything stayed the same. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's say that Chris is all grown up and he wants to have children of his own. All right? So that means that we're going to have to do meiosis instead. Now the reason why we have to do meiosis is because, let's say that we just did mitosis in order to make sperm and to make eggs, and they all have 4 chromosomes. Well, when they have sex then, we're going to add 4 more chromosomes. Suddenly we have a cell with 8 chromosomes in it. We double the DNA every time, right? 65, and then 16, 32, 64. Eventually the cell's going to be filled with nothing but DNA. All right, so before we have sex, but before Chris has sex, he needs to do meiosis in order to cut the number of chromosomes in half, so that you can add the other half from the egg, and you would have 4 chromosomes once again. All right, so before meiosis happens, during interphase, again, we need to do DNA replication, so that we get 2 sister chromatids per chromosome. Okay? Now, during prophase, all right, when the nuclear envelope disappears, and pro-metaphase, when the spindle fibers start to form, you'll find that an interesting thing happens, which is that the homologous chromosomes find each other and pair up into what we call tetrads. Okay? So the 2 long chromosomes are stuck together, the 2 small chromosomes are stuck together. Okay? And an interesting thing that happens is that they can actually cross over, meaning that they will exchange some pieces of their DNA. Okay, let's just exchange once here. Okay, so we're crossing over, they exchange some pieces of their DNA, and during metaphase, instead of lining up individually, like we saw in mitosis, they actually line up as a tetrad with 2 homologous chromosomes side by side. Okay? So notice this is quite different from mitosis in that during anaphase, when the spindle fibers pull them apart, we're not separating the 2 sister chromatids yet. We're actually moving 1 whole chromosome to one side, 1 whole chromosome to the other side. Okay, same with the other homologous pair. All right? So the sister chromatids stay together, but the homologous pairs separate. So during the first division of meiosis, we end up with these cells. Okay? So are these diploid or haploid cells? Right? Who says that they're haploid? Don't give it away, Connor. Yeah, haploid. And because we only have 2 chromosomes now. So it doesn't actually take 2 divisions to make haploid cells. Okay? It's just the first division we already have 2 chromosomes, 2 chromosomes. Okay? So all that's left to do now is to divide these into divide these sister chromatids. So this starts to look like meiosis. So we're going to divide this up and down this way. So I'm going to line these up sideways now. So notice that these do not pair up. They don't pair up because they're not homologous. They don't code for the same genes. They line up by themselves. And so during anaphase 2, we then separate the sister chromatids finally. All right? And and then during cytokinesis, they separate into separate cells. All right? So, what I want you to notice here is that each of these will eventually become a sperm cell, okay? And each of these sperm cells will have a different combination of DNA inside, right? Notice that this one is both completely blue, both completely red. We have blue but with a bit of red mixed in, red with a bit of blue mixed in. All right, we got some variation. So hopefully you noted down some of the ways that happened. Right, so from here, each of these would become a sperm cell, and then it would mix with an egg that's also haploid, and we would get a diploid zygote again, which would be Chris's child, theoretically. Okay, any questions about that model? Sorry for the giggle fit, that happens now and then. Okay, so talk to your groups. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds or so. Decide what those 3 steps were, and also explain how those steps created variation, okay, in Chris's offspring. All right. No, I will post, maybe not from this lecture section, but I will post a video of that online for you guys to study from later. All right. But yeah, I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to a minute to decide what the three events are that introduce variation among these siblings, okay, among Chris's kids and their siblings, and decide how that event added variation. Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, depending on which set came from which copies of genes were in the gamete. Yeah, but even like within one gamete can be very. If you had, say, the that's one.
Okay, 10 more seconds.
Also a crossover, but I think that was the third one. It's actually when they pair up.
This is separated from the code. There should be copies of that. So there should be identical copies.
All right, time's up.
So there's
Both times
well, Annie's group. So can you tell me one of the events that might have introduced variation? In anaphase, in which one? In meiosis. All right, very good, perfect. So during anaphase of meiosis, right, that's an important step in that we have independent assortment of chromosomes. Thanks, Simon. Right? So independent assortment of chromosomes, so a lot of people get confused as far as what that is. What it means is this. So notice that this is during meiosis, the first division of meiosis, and remember that the chromosomes, the homologous chromosomes line up together, right? The red and the blue short one together, red and the blue long one together, right? And then they split apart. So notice that in our model, we had both red chromosomes going up, both blue chromosomes going down, right? Notice in this case, we have it the other way around. So we switched, so the position of these two switched around, so we have the short red one going up and the long blue one going up. Short blue, long red. Okay, this is what I mean by, actually I'll show you here. So this is one of the ways you can get different combinations of alleles in the offspring, all right? So during metaphase, you have the chromosomes lined up like so, right? If you line it up like that, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with cells that are completely blue or completely red. So that's two different kinds of gametes you can make. But just as easily, because these chromosomes can freely move back and forth, right? You could have lined it up like this so that you have mixtures. You have a long red, short blue, or long blue, short red. That's two more combinations. Does that kind of make sense? So in a cell that only has 4 chromosomes, right? So a diploid cell has 4 chromosomes, then that gives us 4 different combinations, as you just saw. Okay, just from how the chromosomes divide where they go. Now think about it. We have 46 chromosomes. Okay, so if you go 2 to the power of 46, that gives us 8.4 million combinations already, just from that, without crossing over, just from moving things around. Okay, so I kind of gave away the next one. So what's another way that we introduce variation? Yeah, crossing over. All right, so crossing over happens, like I said, during kind of prophase, in this picture, prometaphase. And that's when we're actually exchanging pieces of DNA between chromosomes. Right now, this is actually introduces a whole bunch more variation because, technically speaking, crossing over can happen anywhere in the genome. Okay? And so if we have 3 billion base pairs in our genome, that means that we can have a crossing over anywhere between those 3 billion base pairs. Right? So 3 billion different locations where you can have crossing over. So basically, if you take one crossing over event in a random location in the genome, okay, and mix that with the, 8.4 million combinations that you could get just from independent assortment, that gives you 25 quadrillion combinations. Okay, so that is, a quadrillion is 15 zeros. Okay, that's with one crossing over event with independent assortment. Now, take into account the idea that you have many events happening per homologous pair times 23 different pairs of chromosomes, right? I can't even imagine how big that number would be, because every single time you add another random crossing over event, you're multiplying your number by 3 billion. Okay? So it kind of makes it clear why we never have the same offspring twice in a row, okay, with the same parents, because we have almost, not quite infinite, but almost infinite combinations possible. Okay? Now the last one is random fertilization. Okay? So one way that we might have less variation is if sperm that have the best alleles swim the fastest, right? So if the sperm that gives you kind of the best stamina, the best, strongest body kind of thing, if that also happens to be the strongest sperm and swim the fastest, then you won't see, a quadrillion different combinations possible. You'll just see the best 5 or 6 sperm always making it to the finish line first, right? But the fact is that's not what happens. Sperm with bad alleles swim just as fast as sperm with good alleles, right? So that means that all of those different combinations are just as likely to fertilize the egg, right? Same with the eggs. The best egg doesn't ovulate first, okay? It's random as well. So that means that however big the number of combinations is possible in the dad, and however many combinations you can have in the mom, you multiply those two numbers together, right? To find out the probability of getting the same combination twice, okay? So working with really big numbers that my brain it hurts when I try to think about it. And so hopefully that makes it pretty clear that, okay, so with random fertilization, sex is a random draw from both pools, okay? There's no selection happening between faster and slower sperm in terms of the alleles that they carry. Okay, so that kind of makes sense as far as the variation you get from sex. Yeah, Ellie?
Can you get variation from metaphase too because of the alignment of the different chromosomes? Like you can have one versus the other?
Yeah, thanks, Melody. Yeah, that's true. So notice that in metaphase 2, with crossing over, the two sister chromatids are no longer the same. This one has a little bit of blue attached, this one doesn't. This one has some red attached, this one doesn't. So depending on how that chromosome is aligned before it splits, that can also introduce variation as well. I didn't even think of that. Okay, thanks, Melanie. Other questions? Comments? Okay, so we found that sexual reproduction can give you many different combinations. So you take your parents' alleles, mix them up in a whole bunch of different ways, and put half of them into the offspring, a different half every time. Okay? But sex is also very costly. Okay? It's very costly in terms of energy, for example. Think about the energy needed to not just make this tail, but to maintain it, keep it healthy, and to drag it around all day. Right? Also, sex can cause you to have death more often as well. Right? For example, these rams, right, they will bash their heads together, the males, trying to compete for a chance to mate. Sometimes they'll crack their skull open and die. Okay? Elephant seals also fight to the death in order to gain access to all the females that go by in the territory. Mantids, right? So this is a male and a female doing the business, male and the female. Okay? Very dangerous. So risk of death. Also, please don't learn from nature in this way. Okay, time is also important. Think about it. If you reproduce asexually, as these aphids can, you don't have to wait to have sex, right? You don't even have to wait until you're born, because you can just reproduce right away. So when this mother aphid gives birth to these children aphids are already pregnant with the next generation, because you don't have to wait for sex, right? So this mother's actually giving birth to children and grandchildren at the same time, right? Inside of the children. All right, so think about how much faster. So that's why if your parents are gardeners and you bring one little aphid into their greenhouse, right? Within a week, you'll have aphids everywhere because they just reproduce so quickly. That's a really good benefit. And another interesting one you might not have thought of is, when you have sex, only half of your alleles get passed on. So if you have really good alleles, right, and you only have one kid, half of the time, those good alleles may not get passed on, right? So it does seem like an inefficient way when natural selection seems to be all about passing on your alleles, all right? So why do we do it? Why do we have sex? To create variation. Okay, so to get variation in your offspring, to have different offspring. But why is this variation important then?
Evolution.
For evolution, yes. But then we're not going to kind of make bad combinations for just for the sake of evolution, right? So I guess part of it is that you're hoping that your offspring might have a better combination than either you or your mate has, right? Because if you can make offspring that are better than you, that's good for your fitness too. So that is Tiger Woods. Of course, controversy, he's a cheater, but think about it. Is cheating actually bad for fitness? Not necessarily, right? Now, before you go cheating on everybody during reading break, okay? I will talk more about this later on. Do not follow the example of animals. We have a lot more complexity, and there's also, I'll talk a lot more about monogamy later, because I am going to get married this summer, so I have a lot of very biased. So I have a lot of very biased views about humans and monogamy that I will share with you after reading break, right? So that's one reason is that, like, rather than making many copies of yourself, assuming that you have the best alleles, if you make lots of different combinations with a mate, maybe one of your offspring ends up being even better than either of you ever were. Yep, sir.
When it comes to reproducing asexually, how do they evolve? Would it just be random mutations in the generations of asexually reproduced offspring?
Yeah, if something only does asexual reproduction, you're relying on mutation.
Okay.
With bacteria, sometimes they have other ways of picking up DNA as well.
Oh.
Okay. Another reason is because even if the combinations you make, so back to what Connor was saying before about getting variation for evolution, right? You might make some variations that are not very good right now, but since the environment's always changing, a little bit later might be better, right? So for example, let's say that later on in the environment, something changes and there's a new disease, a new plant disease that's out there that's killing lots of plants, including both of the parents, right? But if you made many different offspring with many different kinds of immune systems, right, then there's a better chance that one of your offspring might survive the disease, even if both you and your mate and most of your kids die, right? So if you think about it, those that did sexual reproduction, one of them might have the combination that allows them to survive this disease. Those who did asexual reproduction, they might have had more offspring, but with this one bad event, all of them would die, because they're all genetically the same. Okay, so to have, it's almost like hedging your bets. You have lots of different offspring, some good, some bad, but if things are always changing, one of them might do better than you would by yourself. Okay, so since the environment is always changing, those who don't have variation might die. Okay, in a way you can kind of think of it as Connor said, adaptation, in that your lineage is able to adapt to changes because you have variation. Okay, so question for you guys then. So all else being equal, all right, which species would you think will adapt to its environment faster? Okay, species 1, which only reproduces sexually, species 2 that only reproduces asexually. I want you to choose the best answer and the best explanation. Okay, so first I want you guys just to read the answers, answer individually first. Okay, and then when I tell you so, you can talk to your groups and decide your group answer. Okay, so enter your individual answers once you've had a chance to read it. Actually, in the interest of time, I'm just going to collect individual answers and not group answers then. So I'll just give you another 10 seconds or so to enter your individual answers, and then I'll talk about what I think is the best answer. Give me another 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Right, so a lot of people picking 1 or 2, A or B, I mean, right? Because you believe that species 1 is one that evolved fastest, and I think you're right. The species, so A or B would be the best answers. I lean towards B, okay? A can be argued as well, right, if you gave a good enough explanation. But I'll explain why I think B is the better answer. So A, I mean, I'm assuming that if you have two species that are right now the same, the gene pools would technically be the same. Okay, you have the same kind of diversity of alleles. So keeping that in mind, okay, so let's take a look at how you might get a good combination of alleles, how you might get an individual that's very well suited to its environment. Okay, so let's say that one individual mutates a new allele. So we got like this guy with, allele for building really good upper body strength. Right? Let's say another individual mutates another allele to give them really good lower body strength. Okay, I don't think that's a real picture. So how quickly can we get an individual that gets both alleles in the same individual, right? Well, with species 1, it may not take very long. It could just take a single generation, because if these two were to make babies, right, all we need is basically sex to mix some alleles together, and we also need a bit of luck, okay? Because there's only a 25% chance that both good alleles will get passed on, and you'll have someone with strong upper and lower body, okay? So with sex, you get good combinations very quickly. All right? Because just in a single generation, if you're lucky, you can mix the good alleles together in one offspring. Think about what happens with asexual reproduction. Right? So let's say that this guy here mutated allele A. He's got a good upper body strength. Right? Yes, there might be somebody right beside him who has another allele that would be helpful for its offspring, but it doesn't have access to it. The only way that that guy's going to have both strong upper and lower body is if he then later on mutates a new allele. Okay? So this lineage, after mutating allele A, has to wait and wait and wait and hope that allele B also mutates in that lineage, because there's no way of getting this allele. That one's only in that lineage. Okay? So that takes much, much, much longer. Think about mutation, random mutation creating strong lower body. That could take millions of years rather than just one generation. That kind of makes sense? Yeah?
Can't you argue that asexual reproduction can evolve faster because it's cheaper? So like, looking at STDs, they mutate really fast, don't they?
Yeah, that's different because it has a fast mutation rate and faster reproduction rate. Yeah, so those things will make evolution happen faster, but we're saying everything else is equal, so reproductive rate, everything's the same. Yeah, but that is a good point. Right, so getting back to our answer, so why I chose B, right? So I'd say that species 1 will evolve faster than species 2 because you got better kind of ways of getting, you can more quickly get good combinations. So with sex, right? You're always mixing alleles in different combinations every generation, right? And this is important because sometimes some traits require more than one allele to be beneficial. For example, if you think that this looks a little funny, right? The person who got this mutation that lineage may not live long enough for another mutation to come along, right? So in order to get the benefit of having a balanced, strong body, right? You need this to mutate, and for this to be passed on for millions of generations, right? And then for something new to evolve as well, right? So you kind of lose out on good combinations because they take too long to form. You lose one mutation before another mutation comes along, right? So without sex, you might lose allele A before allele B can mutate in the same lineage. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Okay,